Welcome, everyone, to the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce soft launch of the Climate Action Toolkit. My name is Elizabeth Saftiak, and I'm the Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at the Manitoba Chambers. And I'm pleased to be your moderator for our webinar today. On behalf of our team, we are hosting today's webinar from Winnipeg today, which is located on traditional Treaty 1 territory. Manitoba is located on original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji, Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. This session is the culmination of months of work, and we would not be here had it not been for the support and expertise of our partners and partner organizations. Before we go any further, I would sincerely like to thank Darren Swanson, Director at Novel Futures Corporation, and Derek Earle, Manager with the Global Infrastructure Advisory Practice at KPMG, for their commitment to working with the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce over the last several months, and for sharing your incredible expertise with us. Finally, we'd like to thank you for facilitating the climate action and engagement discussions that we've had over the last number of months throughout Manitoba. I also wish to thank our project partners, the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association and the International Institute of Sustainable Development, for your guidance and support over the last number of months. Local chambers of commerce were integral to the success of our climate action initiative. Thank you for your collaboration and for ensuring our climate action forums were a success. I would also like to thank the Manitoba Women's Enterprise Centre and Communities Economic Development Fund for your collaboration on virtual climate action sessions. Finally, we certainly would not be here had it not been for the funding support we received from the Department of Environment and Climate through the Conservation and Climate Fund. With that said, we have a humbling turnout today, so thank you truly to everyone who has joined us for this soft launch. We're truly excited. The objectives of the Climate Action Initiative were to build awareness and capacity amongst Manitoba's small and medium-sized businesses on the importance of building resilience to climate change and achieving carbon reductions, and also to learn about good practice examples that Manitoba businesses are taking, as well as barriers and enablers that you are all facing. So why did we believe that this was so important? In terms of the bigger picture, Canada has a national adaptation strategy. Canada also has an ambitious goal to reach an emissions target of 40% below 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. This is national level policy that is guiding climate resiliency in Canada, and larger organizations are likely better equipped to deal with the impacts of climate change. And this is why our focus for this initiative were small and medium-sized businesses. Our end goal was always to provide Manitoba businesses with a free and accessible toolkit and resource guide to enhance knowledge and to help businesses target strategies for dealing with the impacts of climate change. So today we are so pleased to launch, albeit softly, the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce Climate Action Toolkit. So to walk you through what we have learned to date, and it is now my pleasure to introduce you to our subject matter experts and our facilitators. So Darren Swanson is the Director of Winnipeg-based consultancy Novel Futures Corporation, and he's also a Senior Associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. He has over 25 years of experience supporting sustainability issues, including climate change mitigation and adaptation. He holds master's degrees in public administration, international development, and geo-environmental engineering. Derek Earle is manager with the Global Infrastructure Advisory Practice at KPMG. He works with public and private sector organizations on their environmental, social, and governance initiatives and on climate change strategies. He has over 17 years of experience in international business, economic development, trade, and investment. Derek is also the founder and chair of the board for Biz for Climate, a business-led not-for-profit that mobilizes business owners to advocate for climate policies to lead to transition to net zero. So welcome to you both. I will now pass it on to Derek to begin our session today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And thanks to Manitoba Chambers, and just delighted to be here with everyone today. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be part of working on this whole initiative, and look forward to today's discussion. So, as we've been working on these climate action workshops, we started off by kind of reviewing some of the fundamentals at each of the sessions, and going through the basics around climate change. And the key message, just to quickly recap around that, is that the climate is changing. The rise of greenhouse gases, is causing warming, and that has effects on the climate all around the globe, and certainly here in Manitoba. And so what we have is a recap, of some of the types of changes that we can expect to see in Manitoba as we go forward, and that we have to start to plan for, both in terms of our infrastructure, but for business as well. We need to be mindful of where things are going, and just the pathway is not entirely certain in terms of how it's going to go. That largely depends on how well we do collectively in terms of managing our emissions, and we're able to mitigate against that. But we know there's a certain amount of warming that is locked in and is going to stay with us. So, in terms of what that could look like for Manitoba, depending on how it goes, we could be looking at a scenario where, Manitoba's climate starts to resemble that much more of, Kansas or northern Texas, which is pretty striking, in terms of what the difference is going to be, and what we have to, like I said, we collectively and as businesses need to be able to plan for. So this is just an illustration of some of the impacts we could expect to see on our infrastructure, and in our weather, in terms of more heat, more extreme weather, melting permafrost, affecting northern roads and transportations, and loss of ice roads, and and changing patterns in agriculture. We'll talk more on some of this. Next slide, please. We also know that climate change is very much top of mind as a business issue. This is some data that was done by KPMG earlier in this year, and really showing the extent to which this is already top of mind. Canadian businesses are planning and preparing and integrating ESG, or the environmental, social, and governance considerations, into their business strategy, and it's becoming a must-have in terms of business strategy. Business leaders also looking at this as a competitiveness issue, in recognizing that it's vital for us to pivot and to stay competitive with where markets are going. There's almost this race to net zero concept that's forming out there, and that becomes a basis to stay competitive. SMEs are very much key to this, so small, medium-sized business, very much key and at the forefront, and that's a lot of our conversation today. But it's also a very complex topic. So we are doing our best through this workshop and through the toolkits and the primers to give the businesses and give you some tools to be able to work through this. Next one, please. This is just a quick recap as we're talking about that business context of climate change and how it translates into both risks and opportunities. And when we're talking about these, there's two elements. There's both the physical types of risks and what we call transition risk, which are more indirect. But physical are what you'd expect. It's weather. It's it's dealing with heat and drought, or wildfires, or changing growing seasons. These all have impacts, and increasingly we have to plan for that in terms of what it might mean to our business, to our infrastructure, to assets that we own, to ways of doing business, to markets that we're in. And on the transition side of things, this is also being very much driven by climate change, and it's changing that policy environment. So it's changing the regulations. Investor behavior is starting to adapt as we're looking for ways to invest in cleaner technologies and ways to reduce emissions. Corporations are making commitments around the globe, not only to how they are going to do business, internally, but what they're going to start to demand and expect from their supply chains. Consumers are weighing in, employee preferences are weighing in, demanding more and better of businesses. So all these competing factors are out there as part of that risk and opportunity matrix of climate, and it's very important for businesses to be increasingly aware of this and factoring this into our strategy. Next one, please. So a simple way to help think about this and a framework that you see throughout these materials, and we'll be talking about it in the examples, is the notion of the home game and the away game. So the home game as a business, this refers to what are some of those actions you can take within your business, within your operations. How could we reduce our emissions? How could we use less resources? How can we kind of lower that carbon footprint or environmental footprint of our operations? So through our buildings, our fleets, the energy we're using, et cetera. Where the away game, this is more about, okay, what are the products and services that we're delivering out there into the marketplace? And what are those opportunities for us to perhaps develop new and innovative ways of doing business that are less resource intense, that help us get to a net zero, that provide solutions to others, whether it be technology or software or know-how or process that can help improve business and get us there? Or do we have older ways of doing things that may start to become at risk in facing new competition, new, cleaner solutions or alternatives? But that's about the products and services that we're offering in the marketplace. So important to keep those two aspects and the risks and opportunities we talked about kind of interplay with both of those. Next slide, and I believe we're going to pass it over to Darren to take us through the next section.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. And also thank you, Elizabeth, for setting the stage for the webinar here today. And what we have here now is a picture of the Climate Action Toolkit for Manitoba Business. Sort of it's an updated version now, a relaunch of materials that were started back before the pandemic in a round of engagements with local chambers around the province. And the toolkit, the full address for the toolkit, which is up on the Manitoba Chambers website, is listed across the screen there. You can find it under the Initiatives tab in the Manitoba Chamber site. But we're excited to share with you the three main sections of the toolkit and sort of give you a sense for where you can find the information that has been compiled to help Manitoba businesses take climate action. And the first part of the toolkit is about resources to get started. We heard from businesses across the provinces that needing templates and sort of how-to guides to get started in taking climate action. And this page populates some of that information with primers and checklists for climate action, as well as links to training courses that are out there. A second part of the toolkit you'll see is about climate action by Manitoba businesses and examples that are out there. Examples of how Manitoba businesses are already taking climate action, and also other useful information about how to communicate climate action within your business and beyond. A third part of the toolkit that you'll find is about climate action knowledge sharing. You will find a range of resources, including some past surveys, a really compilation of barriers and enablers that businesses have experienced with regard to taking climate action, as well as links to other really credible resources, toolkits, and training courses. So let's just take a quick peek under the hood of this toolkit, and then we're going to get into some really good examples, and we're going to hear from a few businesses in Manitoba about how they're taking climate action and what we've heard over the last several months here. But taking a look under the hood, the first part of the toolkit, as I mentioned, is about resources to get started. And you're going to find there 4 handy primers that have been just recently posted. The first primer is just a general description about how climate change is expected to impact businesses in Manitoba. So you're going to see a list of examples of physical and transition risks like Derek had talked about. And so it's a good, handy sort of quick reference primer. And it also makes reference to another Climate 101 business primer that was produced in 2019. A second primer you'll find is about one of the main messages that we've had in these in the webinars and in the forums so far this year, and that's about assessing climate risk and enhancing resilience. And a real quick reference guide for you to understand ways that you could assess your climate risk and opportunities within your business and how you could enhance resilience. So this is a handy 3-pager, 4-pager that can help you get started. A third primer you'll find in this section of the toolkit is about reducing carbon and via the whole circular economy, a concept that Derek is going to introduce to you in a little bit, but this provides a sort of a real sort of first glimpse at what this all means. How can you reduce your carbon footprints, your greenhouse gas emissions by thinking about the circular economy and participating in it? And then finally, you'll find a primer about using nature-based solutions for climate action. And nature-based solutions can really help you enhance your resilience and also reduce carbon at the same time. And it gives you a glimpse for how you can start taking advantage of natural assets and natural infrastructure. So that's the first part of the toolkit. The second part, of course, I mentioned you're going to get exposure to a whole bunch of examples out there. We have featured case examples from a range of businesses across Manitoba that have taken climate action in very interesting ways. And we also have a synthesis, a compilation of all the examples of climate action that we've heard over the past several months from you, all the local businesses across Manitoba, in terms of assessing risk and reducing carbon using nature-based solutions. And there's also, too, a synthesis, a compilation that was done back in 2019 when we were traveling around the province talking to businesses. So finally, the third part of the toolkit, just to kind of complete the picture, is a knowledge sharing portion of the website. There you'll have some new pieces there. One that we're very excited to talk about is a climate action resources and service providers. And that is being hosted by the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association. They will be setting up in the coming weeks a portion on their resources tab that will allow Manitoba businesses to feature themselves if they are providing climate action services to communities and businesses in the form of doing climate risk assessments or helping to do helping to enhance resilience, or if there's service providers that can help businesses and communities reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. We heard in every forum that we did here over the past several months that businesses were having trouble finding access to service providers that can help them get started in taking climate action. And this resource page will help you find those businesses. And businesses, when you go to that page, you will be able to learn how you can get yourself featured on that website. We also have, of course, a really excellent compilation of resources and training courses and guides produced by the Manitoba government through the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training Program. And all those materials are listed on the Climate West website right now that have been produced over the last few years. And these are links to all useful things for climate risk assessment, greenhouse gas emissions, nature-based solutions, business continuity planning, a whole range of excellent free recordings and slides and worksheets that can help businesses get started in all things climate action. Okay, so that's the toolkit in a nutshell. And what we're going to do now is just dive into two key areas that we covered in the forums over the past several months in the various communities that we were visiting and in the webinars that were being hosted. The first one we're going to talk about now is about assessing risk and opportunity and how to enhance resilience, and about some examples that we've seen over the last several months. After we're done with this segment, Derek's going to talk about reducing carbon through the circular economy. Let's take a quick look here. What we talked about in the forums, if you were at previous forums, we talked about this idea of building resilience and how it's important to be thinking about how we can be reducing hazards, reducing our exposure to hazards, reducing our vulnerability to these hazards. And these hazards come in different forms. We're talking here about climate change risks and opportunities through, the risks, hazards that come through climate change, like flood, drought, extreme weather, extreme heat, wildfires, but also the transition risks, policies, laws, changes in demand, consumer preferences. But we understand that you as a business are dealing with a whole landscape of hazards. Pandemics, for instance, cyber threats, financial shocks, there's technological changes, pollution, conflict, various things that businesses have to deal with. And so the broader risk landscape is important to keep a handle on in terms of all the various things that could be creating risks and opportunities for your business. We're here talking about climate change specifically here today. And we, over the past several months, have been talking to businesses and sharing examples of different ways that you as a business can detect and address risks and opportunities facing your business. We talked about the methods of strategic foresight, a narrative approach that businesses can use to really get a handle on how the future may impact your business. And we've shared a number of different sort of approaches to use to help your business understand how your strategies and plans may be impacted by climate change. We've shared with you risk management approaches like the International Standards 31,000 risk management process. Also, very specifically, climate change risk assessments using either the PIVC, the engineers protocol, or the climate lens from the federal government to help businesses and communities understand and assess their risks. We talked about business continuity planning as well as an important way for businesses when you understand risks and opportunities, how to ensure continuity in the face of those risks. And that all of these things should work together in unison in a coherent way to help reinforce each other. So the primers provide some ways to get into each of these areas. And in the forums, we did a mini training in each of these areas to really help sensitize businesses to how to get started in these areas. But the website can help you go even further. And then the resource providers that Manitoba Environmental Industries Association will host on their page will help you get access to businesses that can help you in each of these areas. Let's take a look at some examples. So when we traveled around to different communities and visited with local chambers to talk about climate action, we heard from businesses about how they were taking action to either assess their risk and enhance their resilience. And in the Northern webinar that we had, the Flin Flon-based Community Futures Greenstone had used a business continuity planning tool that had been developed actually by the BC, British Columbia Futures organization. And the Flin Flon organization used that planning tool to help enhance their resilience to wildfires. And of course, we know that is a really acute situation, particularly here this summer, and it is becoming so over the last several years. We also heard examples of Manitoba businesses that are providing services that can help enhance the resilience of communities and businesses. BGP Environmental Group informed us at, I think it was the Assiniboine Chamber Forum, that they provide products and services for improving indoor air quality in homes and offices. And we know even now in the midst of wildfire and poor air quality days that indoor air quality will be an important aspect going forward to building our resilience to climate change. And also the services provide indoor air quality for air pollution if you're in urban environments as we transition to a low carbon environment and get to more cleaner air. Indoor air pollution can be managed through services provided by BGP. So those are just a few examples. And our synthesis report that will be available on the toolkit will amass all the examples that we heard across all the forums, and that will be available within 2 weeks on the website, so stay tuned. Taking a quick look at nature-based solutions. So in the context of helping businesses enhance their resilience to climate change, this idea of nature-based solutions, using natural assets, using enhanced assets, using engineered assets to help to leverage the power of nature to help you build your resilience to climate change is really a really important resource to take note of. We have here a nice diagram from, I guess, the city of Calgary. As you see on the far left, you see the concept of natural assets, and more we're seeing municipalities and businesses think of how their existing natural assets provide services to them and protection, whether it's cooling or water quality. We have examples out there now of how those assets are being enhanced, whether they're constructed wetlands, businesses using constructed wetlands to treat water. You see even trees. We're talking that nature-based solutions could be as simple as planting trees and using trees to provide cooling effects in urban environments, as we know that heat is going to be a big issue. And also we've got engineered assets where we're getting into now things like green roofs, green walls, rainwater harvesting systems to help preserve water in times of drought and things like that. And we're going to hear examples of that. So that's just a sort of a flavor of nature-based solutions. We did hear a nice example from Decor Cabinet Company when we were in our Morden Winkler Forum, and how they've installed a rainwater capturing system on their facility roof. And that really, that sort of combined with its high efficiency water fixtures, the company had saved about 300,000 gallons of water during a drought period back a few years ago. So that's an example of an engineered asset. We're going to hear some other examples of how companies have taken action to help enhance their resilience going forward. So I guess, yeah, without further ado, we want to hear maybe directly from some businesses. So I think I'll call on maybe Dennis Cunningham to turn his camera on and unmute himself. Dennis is the manager of environmental sustainability at the Assiniboine Credit Union, and he shared some really wonderful set of examples of how the Assiniboine Credit Union was taking action to think about climate resilience, both in home and away game perspectives. And we'll also turn after Dennis to Dean Rennie, who is a property manager at Southport in Portage La Prairie. And Dean, I'll put you on notice too after Dennis has shared a few words. But over to you, Dennis. Thank you very much for sharing what you did back now, I guess about a month ago at the Assiniboine Chamber. You had lots of interesting things. So over to you if you want to just share a few words on in the area of climate resilience, and then we'll come back to a lot of the carbon sort of reduction efforts you've done later when Derek sort of gets into that part.
Sure. Thanks very much for giving me the chance to provide a few examples of what we're about to do, or I guess, or what we're starting to explore around resilience. So I think from maybe the approach of assessing risk, we recently joined a coalition of financial institutions in a group called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. And the intent of that is for us to look at, I guess, the risk exposure we have with our financed emissions. So what will the impact of climate change have on our lending, and what are those greenhouse gas emissions associated with our lending practices, and how do we work to both reduce the greenhouse gas emissions within our loan portfolio, whether that's vehicle loans, home mortgages, or commercial real estate lending, and assess that both as a kind of a risk as well as an opportunity for new business products. And it's a pretty exciting, I think it will be an exciting journey for us because it's so new, but it also provides an opportunity for us to begin developing some new targets on both how we reduce those emissions associated with lending, but also how we minimize risk that's associated with that lending as well. So as the climate is anticipated to change, the risk that we're exposed to, sort of both from physical perspectives and transitional perspectives, we can better manage when we understand what our financed emissions look like, and it allows us to, I think, continue to maintain sort of a leadership role in our sector, and hopefully share those learnings with other financial institutions operating in the province as we go forward. yeah, I'm happy to talk about our more sort of operational reductions later on if you want.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dennis. It's really, a really good example of sort of the bigger picture sort of transition risks and opportunities that are out there now. Now, even with lending institutions now having to be thinking about the climate, how greenhouse gas emissions then are sort of materializing in the lending part of the of your business. So we're seeing that, of course, globally in a lot of the financial disclosure sort of voluntary and regulated processes that are starting to emerge for lending institutions and larger businesses. And we see how this will sort of propagate down, I guess, to supply chains, and how smaller businesses then are the footprints of other businesses. And so it's important for small businesses to even be thinking about their carbon emissions. Thank you very much, Dennis, for that. And interesting how you're sort of participating in these other groups and networks that are helping lending institutions think about this and how to understand the risks and the risk exposure. So Dean, when we were talking, Dean Rennie now is the assistant property manager with Southport Aerospace in Portage la Prairie. And Dean, you'd shared some interesting examples of how in your residential property, commercial property areas that you're starting to think about climate change impacts and how you could become more resilient. And I wonder if you might want to share some of those actions.
Sure. Well, one specific example, I guess, is we inherited 188 residential rental units when the Canadian Forces Base here closed in 1992. So basically now we manage those assets. The opportunity came up in 2020 to replace all of the furnaces in the units. They're aged, inefficient gas burning appliances that were in need of repair or replacement, sorry. So what we're doing is we're replacing the gas burning furnaces and hot water tanks with electric appliances, again, to bring down that carbon emissions. We're expecting to save 610 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year with this program. We also identified a risk with this project. Basically, a few years before, we had multiple extreme weather events, high winds, we had a tornado on site. And we found that a lot of the trees blowing down on the hydro lines on these individual residential units was causing huge delays in being able to resupply power to our customers just because of the damage, the infrastructure on each of these individual units. So as part of this residential furnace program, we have to upgrade the electrical panel to a 200 amp service anyway to supply. So what we also did was we trenched all of the wires from the hydro poles to the houses rather than have them hang over the backyard and be at risk of damage from trees blowing down, things like that. I think we thought of that as a climate resilience aspect, moving forward to be able to ensure the supply to our customers in a timely manner, to have so people have a nice, safe place to live.
Excellent. Thanks, Dean. That's a really, really good example how you've taken on some new property and you've already been thinking about the carbon reductions part of it, but also identifying the risks and the risks of extreme weather and maintaining sort of a reliable power supply by burying power lines. Excellent example, and thank you for sharing that. And we'll look to come back to you, I guess, in a few moments' time to talk even further about some of your carbon reduction efforts. But Elizabeth, I'm just taking a look. I see the chat space is quite active. I do want to encourage everybody who's online right now to feel free to add examples of how your business has taken action to either assess climate risks and opportunities and even enhance your resilience. Please feel free to add sort of an example of how you're doing that and your business name. And we will be sure to include that in the summary compendium that we do provide on the toolkit website in terms of what actions the Manitoba businesses have been taking. But we do have a few questions, Elizabeth, that we should clear the air on here before we move on to the next part.
Perfect, thank you. We do have a question from Mike. He's wondering if over the course of our Climate Action Forum series that we found that Manitoba businesses were expressing confusion or a sense of frustration with the many terms and concepts used in this space. So for example, climate change, ESG, circular economy, etc., that are commonly used to describe the set of options and actions that SMEs need to consider.
Yes, that certainly was something that came up in pretty much all the forums and webinars, that climate change, taking climate action is can be a complex process. I remember one forum, I think early on, it talked about it can seem like drinking water from a fire hose, but it's a manageable process. If you just turn down the water pressure a bit and think about all the things that need to be done. There are terms out there, and I think the reason for this initiative was to help think through those terms. The term circular economy now is starting to become a more used word. So we've tried to clear the air on what that means and how businesses could really unpack that. And Derek's going to get into that a little bit. Our forums went into a bit of training on the circular economy and some really tangible actions that could be taken for businesses. And you'll find that information up on the website in the resources to get started. But certainly there are a number of terms, and that is going to be unavoidable to an extent as we embark on a rather complex economic shift to a low carbon economy. But efforts like this are meant to help really sort of make that more digestible and turn down the water pressure to a degree so businesses can take action without being feeling too intimidated off the start. So thank you, Mike, for that. Hopefully the Climate Action Toolkit for Manitoba Business helps to allay some of the confusion around the terminology. Thank you very much. Participants, please do continue to use the chat space to share examples. Thank you, Nicole, from Herzing College too, for sharing your example in that space and the educational opportunities that you're providing through the college to help businesses take climate action. Thank you for that. I think with that, Derek, we're going to move on now to the next section here and get right into carbon reductions. Let's move into that, and we'll come back perhaps to some survey questions a little bit later.
Sounds good. Thank you, Darren. And just to maybe kind of add on to that reflection, I mean, in terms of the complexity and the terminology that's out there, I think you answered that really well. But there's a reality that this is it's a fast-moving environment out there. There's new regulations coming out on a consistent basis. There's new different incentive programs. There's different reporting requirements that are coming out in the financial sector. So there's definitely a complexity to that aspect of it. It can be a bit dizzying. The finding from earlier was that the businesses are finding this complex. But a lot of the concepts of what we're talking about aren't as complex. We can understand and take a basic look at our businesses, where we're using resources, where we're emitting. Some of the risk assessment tools lay this out in a pretty straightforward way that are quite useful as well. So, as Derek said, hopefully all this toolkit helps. So that's fine. But talking about the circular economy and the circular economy as part of emissions reductions, right? So a big part of climate action, and we tend to focus on a lot, or the most, is in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But the circular economy is really, it's a complement to that, and it's part of the big picture of how we're going to do that in a broad way and across the economy. So the idea is really based around three principles, which is number one, around eliminating waste and pollution out of our processes. It's about the products and materials that we're using, recirculating the products and materials throughout the life cycle, and regenerating natural systems. So those are some of the key ideas. You can actually just back up one, Darren, to this one. Yeah. So when we're talking about GHG or greenhouse gas emissions, this is a useful slide and concept, and we did spend some time going through this in the workshops. And it just paints a picture of some of the terminology to be aware of and thinking about, how do we start to account for what we're doing in this area, and how do we report on that, and how do we eventually plan to bring this down and reduce our emissions. And that's just language you see on the left around scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. And it's displayed graphically here as well, because there's multiple sources that kind of surround your business. And the scope 1 are those things that your business does directly. It kind of relates to that home game that we're talking about, like what's happening within your shop, within your operations. How are you using energy and resources? Scope 2 has to do with the energy and the electricity that are consumed by your business. So what are you purchasing and bringing in? So we don't talk about it as much in Manitoba, because we're already quite fortunate in most cases to have a relatively low emissions electricity through Manitoba Hydro, which is already renewable. But you can imagine a situation if you have operations are located elsewhere and you're purchasing that power. Are you purchasing it from a wind farm or from a coal plant? That's where it really starts to factor in. And then scope 3 is a much bigger and broader circle that goes around your business activities. And that relates to your supply chains and that entire kind of upstream and downstream value chain. So the products that you're using, that you're buying, that you're sourcing, that you're transporting and then processing, turning it into that product. But then it also, once you send it out and you sell it into the marketplace, it is going out to, it's being transported again, it's being distribution, and eventually there's an end of life component to it as well. Does it end up in the landfill or what happens to it? And there's emissions along that whole trail, and that's what's called scope 3 emissions. That's where an awful lot of the conversation is focused these days, on helping understand how do we account for that, and how do we start to put in place systems and processes to manage that. And the circular economy is very much a strategy, and a broad strategy that we can use, and it applies both to businesses in tangible ways that we can do, and at a more macro level in terms of strategies we can think of how the economy should operate. And that gets much more into the things from Dennis' example from a minute ago in terms of financed emissions. So you'd have the emissions happening at the credit union, but all that lending in each of those companies or businesses or homes or buildings that are being financed, each has their own emissions profile, and that gets in the scope 3. Okay, jump ahead to the next one. So yeah, we just touched on it. A backup one. We glanced at this slide, the linear and the circular, just to recap again. So you see the linear on the left, where you've got a much more of a taking resources out of the natural environment, extracting them, using them, and then disposing of them, going to landfill with some amount of renewable resources and circularity going back in. And on the right hand, more where the idea to get to with a circular economy is you have much more of the resources and the energy stays within the circle, and it recirculates throughout the economy. So you're really starting to reduce the amount of new resources you're taking out of the environment. You're finding ways to reuse, and obviously, and really limiting and reducing the amount that's going to landfills, because all those, what goes to landfill also causes sources of emissions. So that's the idea, but sort of how do we get there, and what are some examples of it? So next one, please. So we do have some examples of circularity in the business community. So this is one that came out of the forum. This is from the Niverville and the Steinbach session from Milieu Market out of Steinbach, and essentially a refill service. Right, so this is products, personal care, household cleaning products, etc., where the idea is you can go refill your container, get those products, as opposed to purchasing, using, and then disposing of all that containers and that plastic and etc. all along the way. So also incorporated many different examples, kind of like zero waste and environmentally friendly, eco-friendly practices into the storefront and how they're operating. So in that home game model, but also that product or service, right? The refill service is that away game of like what we're doing and we're introducing into the marketplace are ways to that fit as an example. Next one. WinPack. So this is a large manufacturing packaging company based here in Winnipeg and with a North American and global footprint, production facilities here. It's a much larger type of product, and they deal with packaging and plastic packaging. They do a lot of food wraps and things like that. Working very much on their objectives in terms of you see a corporate goal to get to zero landfill waste by 2025. So we'll want to check up in a couple of years and see how that's coming along. And, you know, looking at ways to reduce the energy consumption year over year, getting towards net zero. And, you know, as part of the away game is looking at, you know, how can we innovate around design to, you know, extend shelf life of food products, reduce food waste. You know, we don't have the stats up on here, but you know, generally speaking, the amount of food waste when you look into it into the system is quite staggeringly high, and all of that not only being inefficient, but you know, has consequences and emissions as well. So, you know, those are ways to start to factor it in and start to illustrate a bit the amount of, you know, design that goes into these things as well. Because the best way to, you know, to plan for the end of life is you have to design it up front, and how can those waste streams and materials be used afterwards. It's very key to the thinking around this. Next. And one more example, this is one that was shared throughout the climate action forums, if anyone saw this, but it's another Manitoba example. Frontiers North is the tourism company in Churchill, Manitoba, that takes you out on the tundra buggies to go do the polar bear tours. This is an example, a circularity example through a partnership with New Flyer Industries, NFI, that builds the electric buses, manufactures those in Winnipeg and exports those around the world, and collaboration with Red River Polytech. But the whole idea, it's taking the batteries, used batteries from the zero emission buses and using those to power the tundra buggies. So nice example on the one hand of like extending that shelf life, the product life of the batteries coming out of the bus sector, and, you know, giving new life to those to power the tundra buggies, and also displacing the fossil fuels that would have normally been used to power those. So a nice bit of symbiosis there and a local partnership. Great story. Next one. And these are some resources we'd like to highlight. Supply Chain Manitoba has been doing some tremendous work on this topic of circularity and practices. Some of the example we just cited there for, you know, came out of this work, but there are some excellent resources. Highly recommend anyone who wants to dive deeper on the subject to visit their website, look at the testimonials, the videos, and the resource guide, so you can help, you know, you can start looking at planning circularity, you know, into your business and operations. Next. So, well, we're going to open it up again. We're going to come back to our, you know, a couple of our companies have been kind enough to start sharing their stories, and we'd like to hear more about the examples from this side of it, you know, from the emissions reduction side and some actions that are being taken. So I think we'll call on Dean again at Southport, and maybe share some of this side of the story, Dean, if you know.
Sure, thanks, Derek. So since 2017, we've been tracking the emissions from our commercial site. That includes in total 26 different buildings, totaling just over 50,000 square meters in building space. Each year, we assess those emissions and we make reduction plans. Of course, it's a bit overwhelming. You can't do it all at once, so we kind of pinpoint bits and pieces here where we can work to make improvements. We've also taken into consideration what our future looks like. We know we have another important government flight school training contract coming up right away that's going to see lots of new construction on site. So basically what we've done is we've made the commitment to, for all new construction that happens on site, is to be at least LEED Silver certified, you know, to again, ensure our business thrives in the future, and we're you know, leaders in the carbon reduction struggle, I guess. We're just on the verge right now. We're exploring a district geothermal system to help to support our new builds and to retrofit some of our existing buildings to try again to bring down that carbon footprint and not necessarily supplement 100% with electrical to kind of bring that that strain off of the system a little bit. So we've got lots of plans. We've got lots going on. And again, it doesn't happen overnight. So plan, look ahead, do the work, but it's worth it in the long run.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Dean. And yeah, some great illustrations there in terms of the plan. Well, the planning going forward, it really highlights one of the key messages around how do we start to transition to and adopt circular practices is that planning and design phase. So thinking ahead with that future lens to what your new construction is going to look like, what those requirements are going to be, what the standards, incorporating the district geothermal to, that's going to, of course, displace potential electricity as sources of heat, but it certainly has, could be displacing natural gas or other fossil fuels that are developing there. So,
well, 97.5% of our carbon footprint is natural gas burning. So that taking that away would certainly make a big difference for us.
Absolutely, that's a substantial percentage, but I think that also tells another part of the story, in that the building sector, the buildings, real estate in general, the footprint around that collectively is substantial. So that's part of the way we tackle this, right? And looking at reducing that reliance on fossil fuels and becoming more circular, and learn how it makes sense.
Yep.
Dennis, can we come back to Dennis Cunningham? I think you're going to tell another part of the story, some more examples what ACU is doing.
Yeah, and it's similar to Dean's story. We have focused a lot on using greenhouse gas emissions as kind of the overarching metric for measuring our environmental performance. And by doing that, it's led us down a variety of paths as far as initiatives we've undertaken. So we've done lots related to building energy efficiency. We've got several LEED certified buildings in our inventory. We've relied heavily on geothermal or district energy for heating and cooling our buildings. We've engaged a lot with employees to get them on side and participating in energy efficiency and waste reduction and paper reduction, because those are areas where we have significant emissions. So building energy efficiency, very similar to Southport. Building energy usage is a significant percentage of our greenhouse gas emissions, specifically coming out of natural gas consumption. And then the other big component for us is employee commuting. And so we measure and monitor employee commuting through annual employee commuting surveys, and we identify opportunities and barriers to sort of mode shifts, and then introduce different opportunities to encourage employees to transition to either carpooling or active and green commuting, or try and get employees at locations where they're closer to home so their commutes are actually shorter. We've also linked greenhouse gas emission reductions into a component of how we measure our corporate success, and how that then feeds into our variable pay. So the bonus that an employee might get, a percentage of their performance is linked to us achieving greenhouse gas emission reduction targets year over year. And then we also have, leadership providing significant support and buy-in to the concept. And that's been really critical over the years that we've been engaged in measuring and managing greenhouse gas emissions. So all those things tie together to give us a fairly robust program of for addressing climate change impacts and trying to be a leader in this area.
All right, thank you, Dennis. And if I might say, possibly even being a little bit modest in terms of your, touting your leadership role in this area, as I believe you're recent winners of the Spirit of Winnipeg Award in the environmental leadership category for this work as well. So
yeah, fair enough.
definitely pleased to have you here. The bar is high, folks, in terms of what AC is doing, but so many great examples and practical things that can be done. And your comments on employee commuting is quite interesting to talk about. And I remember when we did the first round of these workshops a few years ago. At that time, one of the panelists was the president from Red River College, and Red River has done a lot of innovative building, and we're familiar with their exchange campus and all the the work going on down there. A lot of leadership in the space, but the comment always stuck with me that one of the things they said was that yeah, we've done a lot in terms of how we design the building and how we operate, and we put a lot of planning into this. But the most impactful thing we did in terms of our overall carbon footprint is we located downtown next to public transit, where 90% roughly of our student body and most of our faculty take public transit, and that's by far the biggest kind of impact. And that one really always kind of stuck with me, because when we're thinking of okay, what can I do as a business? What are solutions? They don't always have to be the most high-tech ways we can approach this, right? This is simply choosing where we're going to locate, and do we have easy access to public transit that our employees can use, and especially when you have high volumes of students or employees coming on site, what a difference that alone can make. And yes, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, I think Darren, I think it's maybe back over to you for carrying on to the next session.
Excellent, Derek. Thanks for facilitating that part, and Dennis and Dean for chiming in again. And we're seeing wonderful posts in the chat space on examples of taking climate action, and continue to encourage everyone online to do so. Great to hear from Mark at Easy EV, who's really trying to move the bar forward on making charging stations available across the province. We've got folks, Nick at Green Action Center has produced a wonderful set of resources through their organization too. So encourage folks to reach out to Nick and visit the Green Action Center. And again, Nicole as well for elaborating further. So thank you for that. We do want to just cover one last little bit here before we start to kind of wrap this session up. We try to keep it short, everything short and sweet here today, because we know it's July and everybody's quite busy, and we just wanted to give you a flair for this over the lunch hour. But some other things, we're going to come back to the survey perhaps near the end, but one of the things we also asked businesses when we were visiting the local chambers around the province, and also through business associations on the webinars, was just to understand some of the barriers that they might be experiencing in their taking climate action, because that's important information. Once barriers are there's awareness of barriers and an understanding of them that can be addressed by various actors across the system. And I encourage you now, participants, to, if you're experiencing some barriers to taking climate action, to share those in the chat space, and we'll be sure to include that in the final report that we'll post on the toolkit website. But just a flair for a few of the ones we heard from businesses. I think it was, well, at least at several of the forums, we did hear about local businesses being surprised that when they wanted to think about purchasing carbon offsets, that's, this is the mechanism where if you reduce as much carbon as you can directly, but you can also then, for that which you cannot do yourself, you can purchase offsets from other segments of the market that will create those reductions. But they were surprised that those offsets, those projects that provided those offsets weren't really available in the Manitoba market. So they had to go internationally to purchase these, or out of province to purchase these offsets. And that was often described as a missed opportunity, and an opportunity that is there for the Manitoba market to start to provide those offsets. We did hear some barriers regarding education and awareness, and this was several businesses saying that templates and how-to guides really are needed for small businesses to take that initial small step into climate action. And that is certainly something we've heard across forums and even the previous period. And the primers and the Climate Action Toolkit were, I guess, designed to really help with that comment. So we hope in the resources section of the Climate Action Toolkit that you do find some of those short sort of how-to guides to get started, and at least ways to get further down the path. And then also the resource tab that you'll find on the new Manitoba Environmental Industries Association website on service providers for those experts that can help you take climate action, so you can have a quick access to who those organizations might be in Manitoba. We also did hear a bit about some infrastructure barriers that might exist out there. We heard some businesses talking about, well, they know that composting can help sort of reduce a lot of emissions from landfills to the methane reduction, but the composting service is not just readily available to households and businesses. We did hear that the charging infrastructure is still limited in Manitoba for the electric vehicle market. We've got providers online here already that are trying to help address that. We talked about burying power lines being a really good sort of resilience tactic, but it does take a little bit of time and a process to really work with the utility providers to get those lines buried. Actually, we heard from some folks in the roofing sector that policies and regulations needed to really help support the recycling of roofing shingles in commercial and residential developments to help with that circular economy part of it, and to help homeowners when they do retrofits to really help with inspections that could help ensure the quality of roofing systems. And just last few examples here to wrap up. A really important one we did here down in the Niverville-Steinbach local chamber forum was that it was noted that in many, I guess, low carbon and resilient solutions from a municipal government operational perspective, there's still some barriers in that implementing some of the low carbon solutions at a municipal level scale makes some services unaffordable or less affordable for low income residents. And that highlighted, I think, in that forum, this conversation and this idea of just transitions when we're moving to the low carbon economy, to ensure that when we're pursuing climate friendly and climate resilient economy and solutions, that we leave no one behind in the process. So that's an important thing. You will hear the term just transitions now out there if you're Googling, and it's important to be thinking about when you're looking at scale, whether you're a business or a municipal government. And lastly, just other things we did hear, other barriers, of course, businesses wanting to really know about assessments, who provides assistance to do greenhouse gas assessments of a business or climate risk assessments. Manitoba Environmental Industries Association will create a resource page to help with that, and that will be a link provided on the Manitoba Chambers Toolkit. And also funding came up as well, of course, but specifically that seed funding for taking businesses to take climate action or take that initial step, whether it's an assessment or an initial sort of assessment of energy or GHGs, would be super helpful. And I know Manitoba government is working to provide some of those incentives, those seed funding incentives through their funding programs. And that'll be an important thing, I think, going forward as that businesses have a good access to where those seed funding opportunities are. I think that is just a list. Now, climate action, the barriers, if you're experiencing barriers, please feel free to continue to add those to the chat space here, and we will add that to the list that we've compiled through the previous forums and make that available in a compendium report on the Toolkit website. I want to continue to thank everyone for their what they've been putting on the chat space right now. Some excellent resources and things. And I think, Elizabeth, we probably do is if there's a question, we could take a quick question right now before we close out, just to clear some of the space there. But
Perfect.
please continue to use the chat space, and we'll keep it open after the webinar too, so that you don't have to hurry and finish all your typing right away.
Thanks, Darren. So Ian had a question regarding carbon offsets and wondering whether or not there were any discussions taking place with the government of Manitoba on carbon offsets.
Good question, Ian. And I know that's been a conversation that has been many years in the making in terms of carbon offsets in the markets. I don't know if we do have Manitoba government representatives that want to throw some resources or links into the chat space. Please feel free to do so, or raise your hand and we could let you respond directly to that question if that's possible. But Ian, you're right, Matt, the offsets for being able to get those locally, I think are going to be important for Manitoba businesses, in addition to getting them internationally and out of province. So I think that'll be something that maybe the Climate Action Toolkit will be able to provide a link to as those offset opportunities become available, so that you have quick access to those. Okay, Elizabeth, I think looking at the clock, we do need to get people out the door on time here today. So I think with that, I will turn the floor back to you and just thank all the local businesses and the local chambers for all their engagements over the past several months, providing excellent examples. It was really, really encouraging seeing in every community, every local chamber, examples of businesses that are taking action in various ways. We were seeing action in carbon reductions. We're seeing a lot of action in the circular economy, people doing greenhouse gas assessments. An area I think where there's more sort of resource and sort of room for more action will be in understanding climate risks and opportunities that face businesses and how they can really leverage action to mitigate risks and realize opportunities. So that'll be important going forward. And also thanks to Manitoba Chamber for taking leadership on this and continuing this conversation on climate action across Manitoba. So with that, back over to you, Elizabeth.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And a really big thank you to you, Darren and Derek, for sharing insights that we've learned over the course of this initiative. This was, I believe, a really successful initiative. We had an opportunity to collaborate with local chambers, organizations, and to meet many businesses who are taking a leadership role in this space. So it's been really cool. So thank you to you both for all of your work over the last several months, and of course for facilitating today's session. So just to wrap up and talk about next steps, as you've heard today, we will be providing and sharing a freely accessible climate action toolkit on the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce website. So over the next few weeks, we'll roll out different components of this toolkit on our website already. We have recordings from past webinars. We will include the recording for today's webinar as well for anyone who wants to share it amongst your networks. We have the primers that are already loaded on our website, and then over the next few weeks, we will provide case study examples of businesses who are undertaking great work in the climate action space and who are taking a leadership role in our province. And this will include both written case studies and video case studies. So please stay tuned for that. Also, just again, conveying our thanks to Dennis Cunningham from the Senwyn Credit Union and Dean Rennie from Southport for sharing your great examples, and also for all of those who shared your examples in the chat spaces. As Darren shared, we'll keep this open for about 15 minutes, so keep providing your examples and comments, and we'll be sure to capture those. But to close, I would like to invite Manitoba Chambers of Commerce President and CEO Chuck Davidson to provide some closing comments on behalf of the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Again, thank you to everyone for taking part in today's event. I know how important this issue is, and I think the fact that so many people took time out of their busy schedules to spend some time with us as we sort of shared some of the results and some of the initial elements of the toolkit, I think is terrific as well. So big thank you to Darren and to Derek for their help with this. Big thank you to the province of Manitoba for the funding this initiative. This is the second time around that we've done this work, and I think we continue to build on that. And I think we continue to see that there is an interest within the small business community in Manitoba to learn more about this and how they can get involved. And I think that was obviously relevant throughout this entire process. Huge kudos to Elizabeth Safdiak, our Vice President of Policy and Government Relations, who's really taken the ball on this one and run with it, and has really executed this program significantly to get the results we want. So huge kudos to Elizabeth for all the work that you did on this process as well. Again, from a Manitoba Chamber of Commerce perspective, our focus is always about how we can help businesses in Manitoba. And there's a number of projects and initiatives that we get involved with. So climate change is one that some may say, why is the chamber getting involved with this? We're getting involved because we know it's important to businesses in Manitoba, and we believe we can play a role in terms of bringing organizations together, having those conversations throughout the province, and at the end of the day, providing some resources, and in this case, toolkits that businesses can be helpful for them to take those next steps. We're doing similar work when it comes to digital technology. We're doing similar work when it comes to workforce development, economic development tours. These are just some of the various initiatives that the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce is really trying to take a leadership role to bring organizations together to try to better the Manitoba business community. And I think, we're really trying to play that role for climate change. So great information today that was shared. And I would encourage you again, go to our website at jointhechamber.ca. You'll find out more of the resources in regards to this, and you can really start that process to learn more about all the things you can do. So again, on behalf of the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, our board of directors, and all of our staff, thank you for taking time with us today and engaging with us. And we're happy to have further discussions on issues that are important to you and ways that we can help your business to grow right here in Manitoba. Again, thank you. Have a great day, everyone.